Hi friends, and welcome to the tip of the week. I'm Scott Grover with Worship Piano, and today we're going to be talking about how to use dynamics to express emotion in your worship playing. So let's dive right in. In this tip of the week, we're going to be talking about what dynamics are. We're also going to be talking about the importance of being spirit-led in the way that you use dynamics in your worship playing. And then we're also going to go over 3 practical ways that you can start using dynamics in your worship playing right away. So number 1, what is dynamics? So dynamics is simply just the varying levels of volume in music or in sound. So for those of you that might have a little bit of experience with sheet music or more classical music, you may have heard the term piano, which means soft in music. You may have heard the term forte, which means loud in music. You may have heard the terminology of crescendo, which means to gradually get louder, or decrescendo, which means to gradually get softer. So all of these musical terms that you may have heard of before are simply to express different types of dynamics in your playing and in music. Something else that I wanted to talk about dynamics is also what keeps music from sounding very flat. So for example, if we were playing, a worship song or any piece of music really at one consistent volume level the entire time, or you could also say without using any dynamics, it would sound very, very flat. So dynamics, you could look at dynamics as also what creates movement within a song or within music. Number 2, the importance of being spirit-led in dynamics in worship is huge. For example, if there's a moment where the Holy Spirit is leading into a more intimate moment in worship, we don't want to be over there banging out on our piano super loud. We're probably going to be wanting to play softer. We're going to want to be sensitive to the flow of the Spirit while we're leading worship, or even being sensitive to the flow of the Spirit in our personal worship time, which is different for a lot of people because, as you're even spending time with the Lord in your personal worship time, if you allow the Holy Spirit to, He's still leading you and He's still guiding you. And that does connect with a practical side of music, which is dynamics. How sensitive are you being to Him even in your personal time as you're learning and growing in worship piano, that while you're worshiping, maybe there's a time where He might want you to be louder, or He might want you to be softer, or there's an emotion and an expression and a sound of worship that is trying to come out of you and through you and express to the Lord. And it's important to be sensitive to how do I practically use dynamics to also follow the Holy Spirit with that. So that's something that's really big, and that's something that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. Quite honestly, I don't know if I've heard anybody talk about it when it comes to dynamics in music, is being sensitive and being led by the Holy Spirit. Super important in our personal worship time, super important in our corporate worship settings, whether we're leading other people in worship or whatever that might look like. I just wanted to express and point out how important it is to follow the Spirit with those dynamics that we are playing with. So number 3, let's jump into 3 practical ways that you can start practicing and start learning how to play with dynamics in your worship playing right away. So we're going to jump right into those 3 practical ways that we can do that. We're going to jump over on the keyboard and we're going to pick up right there. All right, we're going to jump right in on the keyboard talking about some practical ways that we can start implementing dynamics into your worship playing right away. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is what I like to call mastering touch. And it's just as simple as how you approach the piano in the way that you touch it. So our touch, how soft or how hard we play the keys determines a lot of that dynamics that we were talking about. So it determines a lot of our volume, and it also determines a lot the way of what we're playing, like actually sounds and feels. So there's a lot of emotion in the way that we just touch the piano. So let's take a look at some things that we can do to practice this and implement it right into our playing. So we're going to use our C major chord and rotate back and forth between that and our suspended 2 chord, which is something that we've already learned. If you missed out on that lesson, it's in the beginner breakdown series, so jump on over and make sure that you check that out. But so first off, this is just a super practical way that we can start mastering our touch, is if we just take this C major chord and the suspended 2 chord, and what I'm going to do is we just start off, what I like to do is we start off just playing it really soft. So see, I'm starting off really soft with the way that I'm touching, and then slowly increase volume. So I'm going to slowly get a little louder, and then I'm going to play harder and get louder, and then I'm going to get softer. Get real soft, and then you can slowly increase volume again. And see, I can get even louder, and then I can get soft again. And that is just a super easy way to practice mastering your touch. Just using that C major and C suspended 2 chord and just going back and forth between those. And because this is something that, especially when you first start playing, a lot of times you're developing that dexterity, you're developing your muscle memory, and sometimes it's really easy to just kind of play a little bit too hard, and it kind of can make everything sound really flatlined. You know, for example, let's take a quick chord progression. You know, if you're just kind of everything at the same volume here, it just sounds real flat. There's no change. But if we do the same thing and maybe we start off a little softer, and we're a little lower, and on this last chord, maybe I increase volume a little bit back into the beginning of the progression. And you kind of hear there's up and down with the volume. See, I can kind of accent a chord and play a little bit. And maybe I'm going to a different section of a song, and see, I really pick it up and I'm playing a little harder with my touch. But it creates some emotion, some feel. And then maybe we bring it back down and see, we get softer again, just like we were practicing. See, we get real soft. And then maybe we hit this chord with a little bit of a medium volume. So that's an example of how we can use our touch. And again, I would start off just practicing the C major and C suspended 2 chord, and practice on starting real light, real low with your touch at a lower volume, and then practice slowly as you're just rotating back and forth between those 2 chords, slightly increasing your volume until you get it louder, and then try to go back down. This starts to develop that feel and that touch with your hands on the keyboard and on the piano, so that's going to really help you. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is some things that we can do with our left hand just by simply picking what octave range we're playing those left-handed notes or those bass notes in that can really affect dynamics. So I did a little bit of it when we were just now in that chord progression and kind of going up and down with our volume. But one thing you can do is you can start off with maybe just doing like one finger with your chord progression with the changes in your left hand. And what you can do is you can kind of build and expand. So like right here, if I wanted to build and expand, I play an octave, and you know, I'm playing 2 notes in a lower octave range. That adds a little bit more dynamic, a little bit fuller of a sound. And then if I was really wanting to add some dynamics, I would drop down even lower and hit a lower octave. see it really creates a much bigger dynamic. And you might not be able to fully see just because of the limit of my camera doing the full octave range there on that, especially on that C. But all I'm doing is I was playing 2 C's, 2 F notes, 2 A's, and then, back to the 2 F notes there on that chord progression, which was just C major, F major, A minor, back to F major. So just super simple chord progression. But you see how dropping down with our left hand, adding some of those lower octaves, it can really lift the dynamic. And again, you mix that in with what we initially talked about. You really work on this touch, softer and maybe medium. And you get a little bigger with it. And then when I go to this F, if I was wanting to really start adding dynamics, maybe I get a little louder before I go back to that C major chord, and that's a good spot to slide down to that lower octave. And that lower octave just really adds a really full and a lot of dynamic, just big, rich sound. And again, this might be something that if you're playing with a band, probably not going to want to always do it, especially if you have a bass player, but we're going to talk more about that in those contexts a little bit more in the future. But so tip number 1 with this is mastering our touch. And again, you can use this C major and C suspended 2 chord to practice that, practice being soft, practice a medium volume, and then practice a little bit of a louder volume with that. Next thing that we talked about thus far is how we can incorporate those lower octave ranges into our playing by sliding down, hitting some of those lower octaves, really boosts the dynamic and changes the feel of it a lot. And then one other thing before we get to the last thing that I wanted to talk about is also with our suspended 2 chord. If you've been following along in beginner breakdown series, then we talked about how you can roll the suspended 2 chord. This is another thing that's really good to practice what we did with going back and forth. So with the soft, medium, and loud. So start off really soft, rolling that suspended 2 chord, and then bring it up to a medium volume. And then you can bring it up loud, and then back down. And then medium. And then you get louder, and you can also get faster with it. Especially if you're not practicing with like a click or a metronome while you're doing that. The louder that you get without that, you're probably going to naturally speed up a little bit. But this is a great way to practice that touch, is just be really soft with rolling that C suspended 2 chord. And then you can get a little louder. And you can actually work on, as you're rolling it, accenting individual notes a little bit louder, which might take a little bit more time with your practice. So you could be soft on the G note and a little louder on the D note and then softer on the C note. So those are all things that you can practice through with that suspended 2 chord. So another great way to really practice dynamics, and that is just super practical and very simple and easy enough if you are a beginner and you're just learning how to play. These are great things to do. So let's go to the last tip that we can do for improving our dynamics in our worship playing, is just how we added in some of those lower octaves. Another thing that we can do is we can actually shift our playing up to higher octaves, which also creates a different dynamic and a different feel throughout a song. So for example, a lot of times, we're playing more central on the piano in these middle octave ranges, which sounds really great. And even when we get softer here, because it's lower, it's going to have a different feel. But then if we slide up to a higher octave range and maybe play a little softer there, that's a totally different dynamic. And it really breaks up and keeps our playing from being, very flatline, because that's not what we want. We want there to be a lot of expression and emotion in our playing and in our worship. So what we can do here is, we're right here in the middle, and maybe we're playing softer, and maybe we start bringing it up to a little bit of a medium volume. Maybe the song is building a little bit, and we might even slide down and hit a little bit of a lower octave. And then maybe we want to come back down and we slide up and get a little softer again in a higher octave range. And then we can still always transition back from the higher octave range back to the middle octave range. And depending on, the context or what we're doing, we can always start dropping down lower again. Maybe we're kind of building and changing the dynamics some more. So all of these different things are all things in your tool belt. A lot of them do start off with that very first thing that we talked about, which is just mastering that touch, that softer, that medium, that loud. Again, with any chord that we play, especially even rolling on our suspended 2 chords, we can do all of those things and practice all those things with those things. And then from there, we can add in those lower octave ranges. We can slide up and we can play in a total different octave range, especially these higher octave ranges for those softer moments or lighter moments. So these are super, super practical ways that we can improve our dynamics and express emotion in our worship playing. That also matches our heart posture or whatever maybe the context is of the worship song that you might be playing. So hope you really enjoyed this today. I know that these things are really going to serve you well, and look forward to seeing you at the next tip of the week.